morning, good evening, good day, good night, wherever you are on the planet. This is Spiritual Technologies 2.0. And I'm John Dupuy, CEO of iAwake Technologies. Again, joined with Javi Otero, CTO of iAwake Technologies. And we're joined by Nick Janicki.
Hello, hello.
And Nick is a entrepreneur and an expert on flotation tanks. But before we, I want to read your bio here so that people just kind of understand more of a context who you are, and then we'll just get into it.
Perfect.
So, Nick Janicki is the founder of the True Rest Float Spa, CEO of Float Pod Technologies, and founder of the floatpodcast.com. True Rest currently has 8 locations opening with 20 more on the horizon, and True Rest is currently the fastest growing floating franchisor in the world. Nick discovered floating on November of 2008 after watching Joe Rogan video about it. He immediately sought out the experience, and after several months of searching, was able to try it. He was sold after the first float and recognized, as society, it seems that we have forgotten how to relax, and relaxation is a state that must be remembered. Flotation therapy is an environment that meditates you, and without any effort, your body, mind, spirit awaken to the memories and the benefits of true rest. Nick has the vision of creating a brand-based platform for floating and estimates 1 million people will have floated through the True Rest brand in the next 5 years. Nick believes the future of floating is all about collaborative technological enhancements and is researching and actively integrating technologies and environmental changes into the floating, including ORME and EMF, blocking sound resonance, biofeedback, etc. Wow.
Yeah. That's a great summary. I don't need to say anything. You said it all. That's wonderful.
There it is. Let me just by just a context where I'm coming from, I did my first floating experience about 3 months ago, and I had been searching for years. When I was just getting into transpersonal psychology and transformation and meditation, I was reading about float tanks and I got to try this. Well, they disappeared off the North American continent, just poof. And I remember one time in Salt Lake, I contacted somebody that still had one. He said, "Oh, we just got rid of it last week."
Right.
I did my first an hour and a half in Boulder, Colorado, and I bought these special, waterproof earbuds, and I listened to meditation for an hour and a half. And I had just been going through the death of my father quite recently, and I went into a state where I went through a death and rebirth experience. I went through tremendous pain. I actually felt like I was going through some kind of spiritual, subtle energy crucifixion and just dying. And about the last half hour, I was very, very intense. And about the last half hour, I came into this place of just beautiful peace and resonance. And it's like I came through. It was very, very powerful experience. So just to let people know that I've tasted this, and I was pretty much blown away by the experience. So
that's beautiful. That's the float you did 3-4 months ago?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. And that was on the first float since the 80s, essentially.
Well, I'd never done one in the 80s. I've been looking since the late 80s, and they just all went away. So it was like when I found out that they were back, the first thing I did when I got to a town that had them was go experience it myself.
You waited two decades almost to try it.
Yep.
That's incredible. It's so interesting. I mean, I hear that story or similar stories so often. I mean, I didn't learn about this until 2008, believe it or not. And so my first float was in 2009. It took me about 6 months to just find a place. So similar to you, there's no accessibility to it at all. And so our first float, Holly, my wife, and I went up to Sedona. We both floated. It was a very nice facility. And similarly, I have a meditation background, and I've been doing meditation in Qigong for about 15 years. And so my first float just reminded me of some of the deepest meditations I've ever had in that hour. And it was so effortless. And so that's why I say the environment meditates you. And without any prior meditation background, someone can jump in this for pain. 3-4 hours of floating later, not even, consecutively, not necessarily at the same time, they get out, their pain is starting to go away, but then they say, you know what, and you can see in their eyes, I feel something else. I feel like this is a spiritual practice almost. And so we don't put that out there. We let people come to their own conclusions, but it's beautiful. I mean, what silence can do and what that environment can do is transformative.
Yeah, well, it truly was a very profound spiritual experience for me. And we live in the middle of nowhere, so we don't have tanks. But every time we go into, I'll go into an area that has them. I'll make, it's something I really want to do, continue doing.
Where's your closest center now?
Well, I would imagine it would be Salt Lake City.
Okay, yeah, there's a few there.
We're about 3.5 hours away from Salt Lake.
Okay.
So, yeah. So what was your background before you got into this? You said you were a longtime meditator and a Qigong practitioner?
Qigong practitioner. And so, it's funny. I always tried to start businesses. I always worked for entrepreneurs, which is a funny word. It kind of sounds like manure. I think there's more E's in entrepreneur. So it's a great word for, what is that? The Wheel of Fortune or something, 4 E's. But, it's something where you learn a lot of skills. So I was in technology for a little while. I did commercial real estate for a little while. I tried to start an online company. And what I realized is nothing was there's no passion driving me. So all these things I was doing while I was accumulating the skills, there wasn't the heart behind it. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs, and almost all of them are successful not because of what they're doing. They're successful because of the drive, the passion they have. They want to change the world. And I think that's a common trait, is you have this thing where you want to get behind it. And so I say, I only have really, other than family, 2 vows in my heart for being a human being. One is honestly to grow floating. And the other is to end the persecution of peaceful meditators in China. And so those are my 2 biggest vows. And so I spend a lot of time on human rights work with my wife, Holly. And I wanted to find a business that fit into our lifestyle, didn't totally consume me. So I see a lot of people working 14 to 18 hours a day, which we did in the beginning. We did in the first 6 months, but now we're able to kind of work on the business and grow the business and kind of be the visionary. And I think, that piece of it's so important. And so for me, once I stumbled upon floating, tried it and just said, holy cow, started doing research on it. There was 15 centers in 2009, 15
Wow.
in the entire North American continent. So I hopped on a plane to London. I spent about 1 week over there and tried 5 or 6 different centers. And it seemed like in London, in Europe, there was 100 or more plus centers. When in the United States, there's 15. So I said, wait a minute, I think this is going to be, or can be, the next biggest thing if someone did it right. And so we wanted to start basically a 4 seasons like spa concept. So we have very nice tile. We have very nice pods that we started manufacturing 2 years ago.
Okay, so you're manufacturing the pods also.
We are manufacturing and distributing the pods. We partnered with a company out of Indianapolis. So it's all USA made. And I just wanted to stay in the US. We've had offers from Beijing. We've had offers from various places, but we've decided we want to manufacture in the US. You just get a lot better quality, a lot more control. And then we started franchising the concept about 1.5 years ago. So it's been a whirlwind. I mean, the last few years has just been crazy.
Okay, so what happened? Why did they just disappear almost overnight?
It's funny. This is kind of a funny story, but I had this guy who looked like a Men in Black guy. He came in with, a dark suit, sunglasses on. He was probably in his 70s. He sat me down when I opened in Scottsdale, and he told me this story about how in the 70s and 80s, Big Pharma started to really pop, well, let's just say really take control over some alternative modalities. And what he said is chiropractic at that time, there's a lot of lobbyists against it. Massage has only been repopularized in the last 10 to 15 years. Yoga in the last 10 to 15 years. And they've always been around, of course, and yoga has huge cultivation roots out of India. But it's never been pushed to the mainstream. That's all fairly recent. And so floating was one of those, similarly, that I heard, essentially it was not necessarily targeted, but there wasn't a whole lot of money. No one wanted to put any money into it. Anybody that had money wanted to put it into Big Pharma. So that's one reason I've heard, and I'm speculating. And this gentleman sat me down and told me the story. The other one was the AIDS scare. So when the AIDS scare came out, people didn't know how it was transmitted. And water, in every water industry at that time, was just decimated. So the pool industry was decimated, hot tub industry was decimated. People didn't know how it spread. So floating at that time was one commercial manufacturer. John C. Lilly invented it, but Glennon Lee Perry started the Samadhi tank. And they were the only commercial manufacturer in the United States. And they had a center, I believe, in Beverly Hills that had 12 to 15 pods or tanks, and they were open 24/7. But when that AIDS scare hit, all the funding went out under it, and it just disappeared. So it didn't have a root. And so these are the two stories I've been told and I've heard. And as you probably talk to different people, there'll be different stories. But
yeah, I'd heard the AIDS scare, and that was about it. And now when you're actually floating, it's an Epsom salt. Is that what they're?
It is Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate.
Yeah, which I imagine would be pretty purifying if there were any concerns about
Sure.
bacteria or something like that. And also Epsom salt itself is something that it's a very healing medium besides water. It man, if you have any aches and pains or sore muscles or anything like that, it just seems to really take care of it.
It's tremendous. Right now we have a upsurge, which is fantastic. I mean, we're having something happen that's never happened before in flotation, quite to this level. So in the 80s, Dallas Cowboys had tanks in their facility, believe it or not, and they were floating. And so that's starting to happen again. You have Steph Curry, one of the top NBA guys. He's starting to float. He's talking about it.
I'd say, yeah.
Huge sports teams starting to do this for concussion relief and speeding of healing, decreasing muscle soreness, and just visualization.
And I think Steph Curry, the last time he missed a 3-point shot was about 3 years ago.
Okay, yes. He is definitely on fire.
He's a 3-shot machine. That's very interesting. And that was the last time the Dallas Cowboys were any good, probably.
In the 80s?
Anyway, maybe it was the 90s. Maybe it was the 90s.
Yes.
I'm trying to look for a correlation.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, how exciting.
I mean, it's a tremendous thing. And so when we started kind of going back, to the human rights thing, we wanted something that would still give us time to do that. So I don't know if you're familiar with what's happening in China with meditators, but in the 1990s, you had all these hundreds of different Qigongs coming out. And the communist government at that time started cracking down. And so there's a practice that came out called Falun Gong, which is controversial in China because it grew to 100 million people within 5 years. 100 million people. So think about that. That's about a fourth of the population of the United States, all meditating together every day in the parks. So if you went to the parks in the late 1990s, you would literally have tens of thousands of people meditating together. And so the Chinese government started to crack down in 1997, 1998. They tried to get membership rosters. They wanted to start charging money for it. And the founder at the time said, it's always free and everyone's free to come and go and learn as they please. So we won't take membership rosters and we're not going to charge money. So this practice grew all by word of mouth with almost no exchange of money whatsoever, which is tremendous.
Yeah.
In 1999, it was banned in China and it was made illegal. And they did self-immolation hoax. The Chinese government had someone catch themselves on fire who was supposedly a Falun Gong practitioner. But later on, it was shown that was just his Beijing Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what was spread throughout the entire world. So the world as a whole has turned a blind eye to this. And now we have millions of people that have been killed and tortured to death. And we have substantial proof that 70 to 80,000 people have had their organs harvested from them involuntarily as a form of execution. And there's tons of research being done about this.
Mm. Wow.
But, so for me, I wanted to not lose that focus. So that's one of my vows, as I said at the beginning. Mm-hmm. One is spread floating, and the other is to end this persecution in China because it's atrocious.
And is there any? I mean, is it ebbing? Is there any signs that it may be The waves, sometimes persecution comes in waves. Is it decreasing now? Have they broke it up enough that they don't feel threatened anymore?
Well, now it's a big profitable machine. So they're making billions of dollars on organ harvesting. So they have no incentive to quit that. So the Chinese government last year issued a statement that they'll stop organ harvesting from live prisoners and live prisoners of conscience, but they haven't. So what we're seeing is now doctors are coming forward that are doing the surgeries, which is a very good thing. So I think the key here is that if people's hearts can appeal towards goodness, these sorts of things will stop happening. So if the people doing the deeds, the policemen doing the beatings, the rapings, if the doctors doing the organ harvesting in their heart know this is wrong, it will stop. But the society as a whole has to change and stop being numb to these kinds of atrocious things.
Well, yeah, you have a very difficult situation in China. You have a totalitarian, authoritarian style of government with a capitalist economy, and it's a hard thing to pull off, and especially when in capitalism first, communication, worldwide marketing, and stuff like that. And how do you keep people down on the authoritarian farm when they've experienced other parts of the world and the freedom of communication and the internet, and it's I'm sure it's complex. I'm glad I'm not a dictator in China right now. I have my hands full. They have tremendous problems. They have the biggest migration in the history of the world. It's been from rural China into the cities now.
Yep.
And they have tremendous problems. They didn't. Everything built for automobiles. People went from relatively, simple diets into fast food.
Right.
More diabetics in China give me on a China roll here than the population of Mexico.
Right. Wow.
And with smoking and with the poor diets and then tremendous pollution in the major population centers.
It's concerning.
It's concerning. Yeah. It's just you can't be a world power if everybody's dying,
right.
Your citizenry. So I think maybe that's, maybe that's why we're getting some agreements on global warming and stuff like that. It's just becoming such a disaster over there. So
right.
But change happens, right? So
change happens.
Yeah.
And I think floating is a piece of that. So I'm one of those that I do believe in a universal consciousness. I believe that as humans, as we elevate our own bioenergetic field, I think is what medicine's calling it now, these things can naturally and dynamically change. So I think Qigong and meditation is a monstrous part of that. But I think for the mainstream, floating can be a piece of that puzzle. And so this is something that's appealing to people that have no meditation background. You can come in and float like it's a spa experience. And I like to say this, it's almost like we're tricking people to meditate.
Right.
I don't want to say that word trick, but we don't use meditation in any of our marketing. And because there's still, I would say, not a negative stigma, that's certainly going away, but there's still a enigma of mystery about it, where a lot of people believe they can't meditate, it's too hard. We get that a lot. And so floating really helps push that stigma away, and it's just very easy. It's very euphoric, and it's enjoyable.
Yeah, and I would imagine, in my case, I've been meditating for a long time now, and I was able just to sink into it really, really quickly.
Sure.
I can see if the first time, you get closed in there and you might have a minor panic attack. It feels like you're kind of enclosed in this coffin and you're floating. But once you get over, the first 30 seconds or so, in my case, I often get scared when I start going deep in meditation because my ego is going, oh no,
right.
What am I going to learn this time? Then I'll be accountable, right? But no, I was able to relax into it very effectively. And I said I was using iOwake tracks I just really wanted to try these two technologies out together, and it was extremely powerful.
Say that again. You used a Monroe Institute, or?
No, we're our company is iWake Technology. We actually produce brain entrainment tracks.
Okay.
And so that's what we do. So I wanted to test it out with our technology, and I went, finally had, found a pair of waterproof earbuds that kind of wrap around the head, and and I set the iPod out, and it was Bluetoothing, and I didn't have a wire or anything, and it just worked really well. And so I just went into this tremendous.
And this is the binaural beats. Is that what you're doing?
Among other things. Yeah, it's kind of layered. It's binaural, subtle energy, isochronic. A lot of stuff is in there.
Okay.
It induces very deep meditative brainwave states, and you couple that with this, absolutely body relaxation, no distraction, whatever that occurs. Very interesting, very powerful.
John, you hit something so huge, because I think this is where the industry is going. And this is the part of collaborative technology. And so I am, or have been considered, I don't want to say this necessarily, but sort of the black sheep of the industry. So as the industry grows, there's now people calling themselves purists, which means they will not allow any external technology to infiltrate the sensory deprivation experience. I am a purist for the most part, but I don't call myself that. And what that means is if you use lights, if you use music, if you use outside technology, you're not a purist. And so it's sort of an ongoing joke for us here, but our goal is to, what are some beneficial technologies we can integrate into the float experience that enhances relaxation? And you can always turn the light off. There's a light button.
That's right.
There's a sound button. You can turn that off. But I think some of these technologies coming out, there's this one, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called the Lucia light. And there's another one out of England called the Pandora star. But what this does is you're basically, theoretically, what they think you're doing is you're stimulating the pineal gland. As we know, the pineal gland is what produces melatonin. There's thoughts that is the physical center of the esoteric celestial eye, and that's the physical manifestation of a vestigial eye. And so what this is doing is it's a patterned light that's flashing that then is creating an array of different lights and patterns. And then people can drop into extremely euphoric states of consciousness. So my thought is, hey, why not try that in the pod, integrate it, design a 1-hour session, let's say, with maybe some binaural beats, this light, and basically you have this environment that if you say, hey, I have fibromyalgia, I have pain, I have anxiety, well, guess what? We have a specifically designed 1-hour float for anxiety. And we know after 10 minutes on average, now we can start doing biofeedback. I've done some biofeedback in the pod. You can start doing EEG scans in the pod. You can start tracking all this stuff. So my feeling is the future is integrating this, but it's going to be a dynamic play based on the person. So you'll start seeing, hey, my brainwaves are in alpha or beta, and we know that with this technology, we can get you down into theta.
Absolutely.
And then we can keep you there through something else. The floats are going to become this dynamic play on the individual. So no float will ever be the same. I think that's where this is going.
Yeah, and it's, with the whole purpose of Spiritual Technologies 2.0, this whole series of interviews, have been mind-blowing for me because we've been really working on this brain entrainment stuff for years. And then you start seeing there's all these other people that are working on other stuff. And it's been a wonderful an opening for me to see everything that's going on. And the idea is, my idea anyway, is that we really want to democratize deep, transformative spiritual practice. Yeah. And, whatever freaking gets you to the game. And, we need more and more people waking up, on a bigger basis. And I think before, at least this is my theory, you'd have a few people every generation from different traditions who would actually wake up and be these powerful transmitters, sure. And we'd all kind of ride on their coattails. Well, I think that age is over. Okay.
I agree.
The age of the guru, it just doesn't work in the modern, postmodern world. It just has all kinds of problems. And most people can't handle it being that, or can't handle projecting that on people. But if we develop the practices and the technology where when you begin to read the great mystics or Rumi and say, oh yeah, that's what happened I experienced that in meditation. I experienced that in the pod tank, and you can begin to get into these transformative, deep, transpersonal, spiritual states on a regular basis. Well, that begins to stabilize that awareness. And I think that leads to higher and higher levels of spiritual and ethical and moral growth, and creativity and wisdom and all the things that we really need a lot of us to show up and have more of if we're going to make it through this really difficult time in human history. And it's starting to come online now. The consciousness is creating the tools that consciousness needs to grow at an ever deeper, more effective, holistic, powerful way. And that's really good news.
Absolutely. That is really good news. And I 100% agree. I have a friend who does a lot of stuff with ayahuasca down in Peru. And he talks about what you just said, is that the age of the guru is indeed over. It is now time for mass enlightenment, mass consciousness shifting. And he even jokes, he says, there's times, I'll have a group and he'll get the energy to a certain point and he'll say, they're now just addicted to me. So they're now not cultivating their own energy. They're just bathing in what I've produced. And I don't really know what to say or do at this point. And so it's an interesting thing how as human beings, we like to be addicted. And I think that's a core of a realization is we have to know that, and I've done this myself. I could be found guilty of this. So when I started meditating, my mom, I was, let's say I'm 37 now. I was probably 21, 22 when I first found meditation and started meditating. And I went home from college and I basically became a hermit, stopped watching TV, stopped watching movies. I'd literally go to work, go upstairs in my room, meditate for 2 hours, read spiritual scriptures for 2 hours, do Qigong. We're talking 5-6 hours a day. And I replaced all addictions with my addiction to spirituality, my addiction to cultivation. And it became the most powerful drug I've ever experienced. Mm-hmm. Physically, euphorically, metaphysically, it was the most powerful thing. And yes, my field was strong then. And in some regards, I would say I was more in touch with the Tao then than maybe I am now, but I lost all sense of balance. And I think that's also an important message is I see that happen to a lot of people. They kind of go and then they start getting, I don't know what that word is, kind of shaky with just basic reality. I think we need to be careful with that as well a little bit and just do all this while still having a sober, strong main consciousness.
Yeah, but it was probably a really foundational kind of deconstructing whatever your sleepiness or whatever and set a foundation for the rest of your life. And so that's amazing that you just had that drive to do that, and I think that's a lot better than sticking a heroin needle in your arm.
I would think so. Yeah.
The pathologies associated. Yeah, maybe you went a little overboard, but most greatness is accomplished by people who go a little overboard. So maybe you pushed a little far, but keep bow for your courage and dedication.
Yes. It's an interesting journey, and just floating as I see it is just going to grow exponentially at this point. And I think you're going to see. So many people are now talking about this stuff openly, and it's no longer, as one of my partners says, woo-woo. But this is becoming mainstream, and it's becoming backed by science. And so what I love is science is getting to the point where it can start proving the things that cultivators knew in the past.
Yes.
So these things that, a Buddha Shakyamuni was talking about are not so out there. And they're actually being validated with subtle energies and physics and the Ormus particle, if you're familiar with that, orbitally rearranged monatomic element. Just these different states of matter that sort of transcend this dimensional layer of molecules and go into a deeper plane of, say, atoms or protons or, so all of these things are being rediscovered. So it's just a wonderful time to be here. Absolutely.
Part of my work has been for many years, alcoholics and addicts. So I know a little bit about addiction, and I wrote a book, Integral Recovery, a revolutionary approach to treatment of alcohol and addiction. So I've been working on this stuff for years, and that's how I got into the brain entrainment stuff, because, it was 12 steps, and step 11 says, you're supposed to pray and meditate. And, ongoing basis. And when we didn't know how to pray or meditate. There was no meditation teachers. It was just a good idea, but it wasn't really actualized within the tradition itself. And so that's when I started one of my students to really be able to meditate. I discovered this technology and went on to, we started our own company and have been, pushing the envelope, trying to make it better. But we've been talking, recently about, because of Obamacare in the United States, the treatment is available almost to anybody. If you have money to pay your insurance, and the insurance companies can't say, oh, it's a pre-existing condition, it's not a disease, blah, blah, blah. That's all been shut down. So it's kind of a new day for treatment. But the real challenge is not just getting treatment centers, which are not enough, but that's the market's catching up with that. But it's the aftercare.
Right.
How do you stay sober? And we've been visualizing this kind of aftercare oasis, which would be a gym and places to meet and places to hang out that's sober, and you have people and communities and swimming pools and everything, and all the hydrotherapy available and flotation tanks. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Absolutely.
And I imagine, I don't know if you have the data on this, but I imagine it'd be a great treatment just depression for people who are depressed. That was my main thing, and I can just see this as beginning to, be part of this kind of integral way of looking at health. And integral practice is another stick that I'm on, which means you got to work your body, you got to work your mind, your emotion, trauma, negative stories about yourself, and a deep actual spiritual practice, not a dogmatic belief system, but an actual uncovering, deepening process. And you put those things together, and then you really have you're working all the basic essential parts that means to be an actualized functioning human being, when you can really give your essential gifts to the world. And I just see this thing as something that can be just such a help for so many people as an introductory thing, and also just to deepen your practice over time.
Absolutely. I have a very good friend, Dr. Dan Engel, and he is a board certified psychiatrist. And he is really focusing on addiction. And I see a lot of people starting to focus on addiction, because when you're addicted, there's not a whole lot else you can do. Or if you're in pain, there's not a whole lot you can do. And so I've had, a lot of people come in with pain. We have a couple Marines that are starting to come in for depression, for PTSD, for pain. And, one of the best analogies someone told me is, he said, when you're in pain or you're in depressed, it's like a little guy in your head just going like this constantly all day long. And you can't think of anything else. You almost can't function. You're just kind of going through life. You're a zombie. All you're doing is just getting this guy to bonk you on the head. And when he had his first float was a little weird. It helped. But by his second or third float, he got out of the shower and he said he couldn't find the pain. And this is someone that's been in pain for 10 years, is on 3 different kinds of narcotics for pain, 2 for PTSD. He has days where he doesn't get out of bed.
Right.
So he came out of the shower. His wife said, how was it? And he just, tears welled up in his eyes. And he said, I can't find any pain. I can't find it.
And that's a deep release. Something happened, really release. And I know that experience. All of a sudden, it's like you do the body scan. Is where the hell did the pain go?
Right.
And that's what happened to me when I was in the tank. When I was doing my meditation stuff, the pain intensified. Just the grief got so bad, it felt like I was just dissolved into an ocean of pain. And then I just came back, and there I was, and just deep peace, bliss, love, gratitude. It was quite beautiful.
That's huge. Go ahead.
I've got a question. How's the integration of the experience like? What happens after? What happens during the rest of the day or the following days? I don't know how often do you float, but
I personally float 2 to 3 times a week. And for me, it's, how do I put this? Now it's not so much dealing with deep emotional issues or pain or release for myself. It's really a reset. It's a remembrance. Mm-hmm. And so very much like John was saying earlier, I'll get into a state where I'll lose my main ego and consciousness for a little while. I'll come back, be the observer of myself. I won't have a memory of the past. I won't have any thoughts of the future. I don't have any feeling of my body. And I literally am just consciousness for that time being. Then I'll start remembering who I am, but I'll forget where I am. And so fear will set in. And then I'll kind of shake, and then I'll remember I'm in a float pod. But for me, that's a huge reboot.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And it's something that I can carry with me for days. And meditation for me is the same thing. And so for me, I don't necessarily, if I'm meditating every single day, I would say that floating becomes less necessary, but it's extremely enjoyable. And I say the word necessary. For me, meditation is necessary. It is who I am. If I am not meditating, I'm a different person. And it's in my wife says, you're a basket case today. You're tripping over tree branches. Car doors are hitting you. The universe is clearly telling you need to go home right now and meditate or go float.
Yeah. This morning I told Pam, my wife, I said, I better go meditate so I don't strangle somebody today. And
right.
She'd go, yeah. And that was a little exaggeration, but but I absolutely, I have to do it, and the way I talk about it, you got to kind of wake up. You got to understand this non-dual reality, but then you have to stay awake.
Right.
You have one, it's like my joke is, man, I'm back in Oaxaca in '68. I was doing shrooms on the beach, dude, and God was there. Well, that was great. That was 1960. So it's like it's awakening, but staying awake. And I think an ongoing practice is what's required for most of us mortals.
Yes. And I love that. Stay awake. That'd be a great T-shirt. So that's what we need to do is just once you awake, stay awake.
Yeah, stay awake. Don't fall back to sleep.
Right.
And I've noticed my ego just tends to, if I don't have my daily practice. And I used to teach to my students out in the wilderness. I was a wilderness guide. The water would freeze over our creeks and our ponds. We're out there in the winter, and we'd have to break the ice, every day to get water again. And it's kind of like the ego, the impressions, the business, the wife, the car, the dog, the this, the that, all that stuff. If we don't just are able to relax in that deep place, and when you're describing that, you're probably describing delta. It's a very deep brainwave state, dreamless sleep, where we go. And when we're in those states, we really recharge. It kind of transluces us with this. I don't want to get too theological, but with this spiritual energy, our essential energy that just seems to make the ego structures just more well-oiled. We don't get lost into our own games. We can see when we start getting off, we can laugh at ourselves and come back to center, and life just becomes much more flowing and livable and meaningful and joyful. At the same time, more painful because you're open to the sufferings of others, as with your work with the meditators in China.
Absolutely. No, all true. And I forget who wrote this book, but I believe there's a book out there called Enlightenment and Then Taxes. If there's not, there should be. That's
a great title.
I would say, that is, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I was even going through this yesterday a little bit. We're recreating, and we're from the ground up, a whole new pod technology. And we're having Hinge guys do hundreds of hours of research for us. We're having water experts do hundreds of hours of research for us. We have engineers working on things. We're in the process of adopting a little 2.5-year-old that just came into our house 3 weeks ago, which is very joyful. And I got home yesterday, and I just looked my wife in the eyes. I said, I'm sad and stressed. And she said, what can I do? And I said, nothing. I just need to reflect on it. But there's just a lot going on. And for me right now, it feels like too much. Not that it's not, but it feels like too much. And this is the point where, a diamond is a diamond because it underwent pressure. And so it's a matter of, who do we become through pressure? And I had the notion a couple of years ago that when we grow the business, I'll be able to delegate more. It'll be, quote unquote, easier. My life will be easier. I'll have more money, so that will make my life easier. And what you realize is it never becomes easier. It becomes far more difficult, but you get better at dealing with the things that used to be hard.
Yeah.
So everything we're going through now is just tempering me. And, the things I dealt with 5 years ago now would be a cakewalk. So I think that's the key, is to just continually stay awake, continually know that, hey, it's not necessarily going to get easier. You're just going to get better at dealing with it.
Yeah. It hurts more, but you suffer less. I think Ken Wilber said one time. And I think the deep relaxation that we learn in meditation, or that we learn in the tank, I would imagine, would allow us to be, because anything that avoids pain, avoids suffering, avoids darkness is a sure journey into the pathological in so many ways, whether it's kinesthetic or religious cults or weird things that happen when we try to avoid the darkness and the suffering. We're called to embrace it. And through practice and deep relaxation, we get better at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe never be easy, but we're better at it. And we know what to do. We know not to run. We know to be present.
And I know that even from meditation. When I do, so in Falun Gong, we do a full lotus, which is one leg on top of the other leg.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with full lotus, but I love teaching it to people because it is so transformative. For me, the first 20 minutes was quite easy. Then I'd get to a half an hour. The apex kind of came from about 45 minutes to an hour. So I now do an hour in full lotus.
Wow.
But what happened was this took me about 6 months to train up to this. But now when I do it, it takes me about 45 minutes to get into that state where I am then no longer my body. and I'm in a state where I feel like I'm 2,000 miles above my body. The pain is just this little leg down here, 2,000 miles below me, and it's so powerful. And I've taught people this meditation, and especially, believe it or not, pregnant women. And it, they say their ongoing days are more joyful. The pregnancy was still painful, but easier, because you're kind of training your ego to say, hey, I'm going to do this pain, but there's going to be something more rewarding, the material gain, afterwards.
Yeah.
And I know in our practice, Li Hongzhi teaches karma and de, whereas Buddhism teaches good karma, bad karma. So we believe that when you undergo suffering, you undergo pain, the black substance karma doesn't dissipate. It just gets transformed into the white substance virtue. And so it's similar, but there's actually a transformational connection between suffering and virtue.
Well, you just described a major chapter in my book. I talked just about that very thing. And again, with pain, when the context gets infinite, then the little old ego suffering self becomes held in this infinite context of wisdom and bliss and love and compassion. And at that point, we can really release a lot more, because we're not just identified. Now, if you're just stuck in your ego and that's all you are, man, it's too much. Mm-hmm. And the natural thing, the intuitive thing, is just to avoid pain at whatever cost. And, we distract, we addict, we do all these different things. But to learn to do that and expand the awareness around it really gets then going. And I say the same thing. The shadow is where the power is. That's the alchemy of spiritual practice. To go into the darkness, accept it, bless it, and say, thank you, teacher, and be with it until it begins to transmute, and it becomes tremendous energy for growth, for wisdom, for compassion. That's the work.
It's worth doing. And so I see this, growing so much, and we have our days and I have my moments, but I know, we're growing something that's going to help facilitate the change in the world. And that's why we do what we do. And that was the mission of why we do what we do. And the beautiful thing is, when you have a vision, you tend to bring people on that collaborate and correlate with that vision. And so every single person, this is interesting actually, when if you go to any True Rest in the entire country, the feeling of the store is the same energetically. And you don't do that with paint. You do that with heart. And so, if you talk to a float consultant in Idaho or Palo, Ohio, or Sacramento, they all are experts. Every single person that works at a store is an expert on floating. They have the passion for floating, and at a core, it's part of their mission. And so this is something that is, I think, so important for companies, is to be a mission-based, a value-based, a passion-based organization. And it's just so transformative for me to even go into one of these stores that, we planted the seed. We gave someone the tools. They came to the university to franchise a True Rest, but then they go do it themselves. They're individually owned and operated. And, I'll come out after they've been open maybe a month or two, and it feels the same. The people behind the desk are friendly. They're experts. It's a cool thing. And it was something we debated about franchising, because it kind of has a negative stigma behind it. But really, if done right, you're giving people the tools to be able to duplicate something. And then as a team, we collaborate and improve it. So we even have franchisees now come out to teach our universities, which is so cool.
Yeah. And of course, that's skillful beings in the world. How do you spread this technology in a way that's, honorable and ethical and effective? And yeah, I mean, and obviously you're very much heartfelt as for your mission and your vocation of doing this stuff.
It's insane, but no, it's picking up, and there's so many people now that are invested in this. So many heartfelt people. And actually, you should go to the Float Conference in Portland in August. So the Float Conference is every year in August in Portland, and this started in
Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
Portland, Oregon, and it started the first one was in San Francisco. I want to say in 2010, and there was about 14 people in a room. And it was Glenn and Lee Perry who invented the Samadhi tank. There was the guys from Float On, myself, my family, and just a couple other people. And now this conference this year should have 500 to 600 people there.
Nice.
And every single person is passionate. It is the coolest group of passionate artists, creative people that you've just ever mixed with. And it's just tremendous. But definitely highly recommend that. I mean, that's a tremendous event.
And I imagine your website has a lot of good information about where your places are and people's testimonies and how to use these, more skillfully. And I imagine, like any practice, the more you do it, the better you get.
The more you do it, the better you get. Absolutely true.
Tell us a bit about the tanks. What's the design of the tanks and what are you looking to improve with the next versions, etc., so people can kind of picture.
Okay, sure. We started from ground up. So every single, so we basically use the Fibonacci sequence for our mathematics on how to build these. So the float area will be round. So it'll actually be a circular round pod. We then took the flower of life. We rendered it into a 3D form, which is essentially a sphere. And we were able to, with the Fibonacci sequence, squish that down while still keeping sacred ratios. And so the idea, much like they do in Rome, we're going to create something that has nearly perfect sound resonance. And so the idea is we have these sonar transducers that produce 50 hertz up to several thousand kilohertz, I believe, if I'm getting the terminology correct. So a bass is 50 hertz. And so we want to get the range of a bass up to something very high. And ideally, what we'd like to start doing is creating the perfect 1 hour float. And that could be, 10 minutes of music at the beginning, maybe some musical tones or binaural beats will come in towards the middle. And then the end, music will wake you up. And so the idea is we want to facilitate people through the float experience. And so we're starting with the actual 3D design. We've been working on this for well over a year now. And we're really just putting a lot of time and effort into everything. We just want it to literally be to the, millimeter on the geometries, and then start integrating the sound healing technologies. And one of my biggest visions is I have a very good friend who's a sound healer with crystal bowls and gongs. And what I'm trying to figure out is there a way, this is a fiberglass shell, is there a way to resonate this in such a way that it's replicating a crystal bowl? And so it'd be you as a human being inside of a crystal bowl. So if that means we have to mount 5 speakers and then have them kind of resonating around, if that makes sense, and then the resonation will continue naturally, that's where we're going with this technology.
And through the solution, through the water and through
the water solution. So the water becomes a speaker membrane. The pod becomes its own vibrator of sound, very much like a crystal bowl.
I heard there's a doctor who's in charge of one of the largest general practitioner medical organization in the United States, and he said that he thought that fully 60% of everybody that goes into the doctor's office was there because of stress-related suffering or pathologies and disease. And I don't even think he was talking about addiction, which completely figures into that. And especially with relapse, it's just the unconscious pressure, the whatever's going on in the brain of the addict, they can't deal with it. And then you get into this trance, like I got to use, and you're down that hole into hell. So I think this could just have so many applications, healthy applications in with so many different areas of health.
Absolutely. And, talking about it from the specific standpoint of intent. And so typically intent is not something you want to bring into the pod, but I think under facilitation, it does have a place.
That's right.
And I am seeing, in 5-6 years, we'll be able to streamline, say, live healing done by such and such meditation person, where basically we can say, okay, we have 400 pods out in the world. Saturday at 1 p.m., we're going to live stream a sound healing. And so all 400 or 500 people that are floating will simultaneously be in the same space for intent. And you could even, flip that and go, okay, now we're going to have the intent of, healing the earth, or we're going to have the intent of doing something else, and we're going to facilitate it. And so you can literally, with this, be able to streamline every pod that exists with this technology to push a specific intent. And now that could be, let's say I need to quit smoking. You could have a depression expert come in and give maybe a 10-minute meditation. Then you have 40 minutes of silence, and then reignite the intention at the end. So there's a lot of things you can do with technology that allow this to be on a more mass consciousness level. Yeah,
even athletics. You can just go and do visualizations in these deeply relaxed states, and it seems pretty intuitive that it would be much more powerful. And we know that visualization is very powerful, and it's being used by a lot of elite athletes and not so elite athletes, people that just love, being an athlete. And sure. I imagine doing it under these conditions, when we're talking about beginning to combine these technologies with our understanding of the brain and the body and the energetic systems in the body, could be tremendous.
Yes, it will be tremendous. And I think there's a lot of tools. I think you're going down the right path, that, but with your technologies. And I think there's an integrative play with all of these technologies. And I think much like you spoke before regarding the gurus, gurus would do their own things, but there wasn't a whole lot of collaboration. And so I think the shift from a guru mentality to a mass awakening is the collaborative entity. It's not this is mine and it has to be this way, and I call myself and put myself in this box, and this is the way this technology will always be. If it's changed, you're wrong. I think we need to get away from that. I think we need to play in other people's waters and see what works, see what doesn't work. And I truly believe collaboration is the key to making all of this successful and making the shift go as smoothly as possible. And that's what's happening with everything in the world right now, where you have, I believe in this version of God versus this other version of God, and now we're going to fight about it. That's not how we shift as a race.
No, we don't. We get really stuck. And I think it was Einstein said that you can't solve a problem on the level it was created. So, you have this, we had the Protestant Catholic version of that, the 100 Years' War. In Europe, we went the same thing. They're going to the Middle East, slaughtering each other in the name of the same God, right?
Right.
And it can't be solved on the, on that level. There has to be this up-leveling, this transcendent.
We're in multiple states. So we built this super fancy showroom, I like to call it, and our corporate office that nobody uses anymore because there's too many other float centers open. So I have this beautiful showroom that pretty much the only people floating at it is me and the people in the office, which is great. But no, we love visitors.
Yeah, and it also, with all this technology, it's not that just the technology, but it really speeds up the arc of growth if you have people that can actually teach you how to use it in a skillful way.
Right.
You can pioneer it and do it all yourself and reinvent the wheel. But, there's in meditation, there's thousands of years of experience behind it. And flotation tank, there's at least 30 or 40 years. When was the first tank built?
First commercial tank was the 70s, but they started doing research in the late 50s.
Right, with LSD and dolphins and who's
all together.
Yeah. I had a joke about I don't know what it was. It's like there's 4 levels. It's like first you just float in the tank, then you float in the tank with a dolphin, then you float in a tank with the dolphin and you're on acid, and then the last level to break through is the dolphin's on acid in the tank.
Which is funny because that's exactly accurate. That's yes, but no, that's funny. But yeah, I think, John Lilly did a lot of...
John Lilly, that's the name I've been trying to come up with. Yep. Absolutely.
And he, he did a lot of good work. He ended up in Maui, and he was a huge advocate on interdolphin relations and, whale awareness technologies. And there's some strange technology that's come out of some of the research done. Specifically with sonar and brainwave manipulation. And so, but no, he did a lot of good work with regard to that. technology.
Yeah, he I think his original stuff was actually what got me interested in trying to find my own doggone flotation tank, you know.
Right.
It had all evaporated.
Well, he was very much guruized by the industry, certainly in the 70s and 80s, and even still today to some degree. And so it's interesting. If he was around now, I'm not sure what he'd be doing, but I'm sure it'd still be with dolphins.
And what they're coming up about dolphins and based on his work. Of course, I think he went a little overboard in the psychoactive substance department, but you know, I mean, hey, it was the 60s, and that's what people were doing. You know,
60s. That's what you did. Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
But no, one of my friends, which was also one of his mutual friends, Adam Trombley, he's a big scientist with 0 point energy. But you know, it's interesting. He's told me stories about John Lilly from the 70s and 80s, and man, they went on some interesting adventures together. You know, with the ketamine and the astral projection and some interesting stuff.
Above my pay grade. I mean, you know, that's incredibly either insane or courageous, or maybe
a little bit of both.
Yeah, a little bit of both. Yeah, but in a lot of ways, we haven't caught up to some of the stuff that's come up there. You have to integrate that, and I think now it's happening a little more organically. And I think with the technology that we're developing now, it's a lot safer. You know, and we know a hell of a lot more. You know, I mean, you know, in the last 15 years, we've learned so much more about the brain than we ever knew, you know, than in the last 5,000 years. I mean, we know so much more. And I think there probably is a place in all of this for the judicious and wise, compassionate use of psychedelics. But you can't be an idiot. You know?
Yeah, you got to be very careful.
You got to be very careful, right? And
they were the pioneers, you know, in the 60s, all those guys, Timothy Leary, all those guys were the pioneers. And so I think it's just a rite of passage that the pioneers need to go as far and as fast and as deep as possible with anything they're testing. But, you know, there is valid research specifically on addiction. I know of a couple good clinics down in Mexico that are specifically working with ayahuasca as well as ibogaine. An extremely effective treatment for people. You know, it's not recreation. This is people that have serious addiction to methamphetamines, heroin, cocaine, and believe it or not, with some of these substances, they're getting an 80 to 85% cure rate.
Wow!
Where they're actually able to get through the 2 or 3 months of withdrawals, and then after they come out the other side with one treatment, believe it or not, they're getting substantial results. So I think it does have a place specifically with addiction, though it's certainly not necessarily something you'd want to introduce to the mainstream as a widespread recreational.
Oh, like don't be a junior high student and take acid and go to school.
Right.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, stuff like I mean, that's what that was
under a proper medical setting.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, it has a place. It has a place.
No, and also, you know, in the integral work, we've understood a lot of, mainly based on Ken Wilber's understanding. We've all been working with that. There's a difference between stages of development and states. You know, and so part of what we were doing in the 60s, we thought transcendent states was the ultimate thing, you know, but the problem is you'd go do your mushrooms on the beach in Oaxaca, come back, and you're still the same egoic jerk you always were. But you've had a taste of something higher, so it could actually be very depressing.
Right.
Then the idea, well, maybe if I take more drugs, I'll stay in that state and I'll be more enlightened. So, yeah, so you can have states, but states, the true work has to be an ongoing practice.
It has to be integrated.
Dabbling in chasing states or avoiding other states, but ongoing practice. And I think that has been, and with the tools and the technologies that we have now, this transformative practice can be so much more grounded, so much more holistic, so much more including the body and the emotions and the shadow and all of these issues that, if neglected, just cause all kinds of problems. So
absolutely.
And this flotation tank is such a holistic, beautiful, full body practice. And in my trauma work, first in my own healing process, and then what I've been learning from others and teaching the people that I work with, that if it doesn't involve the body, if the trauma doesn't come out through the body, release to the body, it ain't going to happen. So all the talking therapy in the world and the analyzing and maybe remembering all stuff. Well, that's really nice, but that doesn't heal you.
Right.
It has to come out of the body, and how it can come out of the body in these deeply relaxed states. That's when the armoring goes down, and it can actually come up, percolate, do its thing, and release. Like the guy you talked about the fourth time he got in the shower, and it's like, oh my God, right. Where did all the pain go? He released it through the body.
Absolutely. But the part of that story I didn't tell was after the first float, he came out and I asked him, how was your experience? And he said it was the second worst experience of my life. The first one was getting hit with an IED, close proximity, in Iraq. This was the second worst place because I relived the physical injuries that were sustained during my float. And so he had to literally work through that and then release it. And so I think, the languaging of this, and there's a lot of research being done about this, is sometimes you have to relive to release. And you have to experience that pain again to be able to release it. And there's a duality here in the spiritual community, certainly, where they think everything is just, rainbows and butterflies. And we're just going to go to this rave and do some drugs, and now I'm spiritual, sarcastically. But
No, you hit it exactly right. And that's what they thought they were doing.
Right.
And it became really problematic. Really.
But what are you integrating? As you said. Where's the integration?
And again, it's the Epsom salt, the warm water. I mean, right. All spiritual stuff aside, man, that is so good for your body.
Oh, it's tremendous. I mean, soaking in Epsom salts has been a remedy for hundreds of years.
But this is so concentrated. This is more than a little cup I put in my hot bathtub. This is like,
this is 1,000 pounds, 1,000 pounds of magnesium sulfate. So you think about that, 1,000 pounds, a 50-pound bag is ginormous. And that's not a real word, but you get 20 of those 50-pound bags. That's a lot of salt.
Yeah. And it feels like, your whole body is just like, you could be a Tai Chi master, it's just everything is relaxed and you have this energetic flow and you feel great.
I've had a couple interesting ones. It's funny, every float is a little different, but one of my favorites was very physical. So when you're talking about the physicality of floating, I literally had a float where about 20 minutes in, I felt like I was getting a energy massage, if that makes sense, where someone's literally massaging my body with energy. And I was just kind of sitting there like, whoa, this is quite nice. And so that lasted for about 20 minutes and I got out. But it's just interesting. The things that can happen in that state, sometimes they are just euphoric. And sometimes they are easy and they are fun. It's not always hard, but
it's not.
Floats where I've gotten out where, I was in there for an hour and it felt like 3 hours. And I kind of get out all beaten up, thinking about something or going through something emotionally. And you kind of get out and you just go, wow, that was hard, but I know I'm going to be better for it. And there's others that were just a fun ride. So it just depends. But
yeah, what you're describing is a transformative practice. And whatever you need shows up, and sometimes we need to just relax and based in the presence of the divine, and other times we need to work through our junk,
right.
That's getting in the way of other stuff or causing us suffering or causing us act.
Nick, I've got a question.
Yes.
Do you think this technology could ever become something that you could have in your house, for example, or something that could hold groups rather than being an individual thing that you have to go somewhere to get?
Absolutely. We have some in houses now. There is a center in Canada. I'm not going to remember the province. I believe it's somewhere around Ontario that, believe it or not, they do 12-person floats together. So they've made it a community experience. One of the things I have someone here in Arizona looking to do is there's these transformational festivals that are happening all around the world. And many of them actually aren't just about partying. Many of them do have an integrative aspect to them. And I have a friend that's very much looking to figure out a way to do let's call it 10 to 20 person interactive float experience where it could be integrating, binaural beats, different video. So this wouldn't be sensory deprivation. You're allowing the float experience to be a platform for you to be able to enjoy these other things. So I absolutely see the group things are coming, and the in-home technology is definitely coming as well. It's just right now kind of prohibitive There's a company called, they have a float tent that I think is $1,500. That you can literally have this tent that you build, and it has some pumps that you can put into your house and float at home. And so the industry as a whole is definitely starting to do both of those things. Absolutely.
And have you found that floating changed your sleep needs, for example, or even your meditation practice in any way?
You know, that's a great question. One of the most misquoted benefits of floating is that floating replaces sleep, or that 1 hour of floating is equivalent to 4 hours of sleep. And I haven't found that to be true. The closest thing I can see from a research standpoint is in 1 hour floating, it's possible to get a similar amount of theta wave sleep or theta wave activity as you do in sleep. That is possible. But what I've found is I've actually tried to float instead of sleep, and I don't actually fall asleep in the float pod. Some people do. Many people do, but I don't fall asleep. For me, it's very much a very conscious meditation. Mm-hmm. I've fallen asleep maybe 3 times out of 700 floats. And so what I'm seeing is that, most people, when they float, are pretty conscious. And so for me, it doesn't necessarily have that.
Yeah. And theta is a place where a lot of the emotional healing and work gets done.
Absolutely.
So
Javi, I mean, I think as this gets bigger and bigger, you're going to have different types of things that change it. So right now it's still very much kind of a sensory deprivation thing. So I think as this goes forward, you are going to have the integrations, and people are going to start using it for different reasons, which I think is a good thing.
Well, terrific. This has been wonderful. And we've certainly found the right person to talk to about this.
Thank you.
And I think there was just a great conversation, and I feel really blessed by just participating here. It's been wonderful. And yeah, we definitely need to stay in touch. And I definitely want to consciously promote what you're doing, more.
Well, thank you.